Now, since we are on employment, and so I guess let's talk about the maternity leave. I mean, so that's Ching, the 90 days. Well, will it affect productivity and cost for the employers?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting announcement, isn't it? I think many companies certainly didn't expect that. Now, it's probably worth stating that we at iMoney have implemented this even well before the government announced it. When we looked at neighboring countries, countries like Indonesia, Philippines, what we realized was Malaysia actually had one of the shortest maternity leave, right? So I think just from that perspective, it's bringing it up to standard. Short term, certainly there may be some adjustments that companies might face, but I think longer term, if you look at research around the world, there hasn't been any proof or evidence that this would lead to a lower scenario where there's lower productivity. In fact, on the contrary, I think there's enough research study that shows that by doing this, you increase employee happiness, motivation, but also increase female participation in the workforce.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
Many Malaysians are actually from low-income families. I mean, I've been in situations where we visit people, in Sabah, in Sarawak, in the rural areas, and the kids do well in school, and they get a posting from UPU to study in Jitra, for example, from Sandakan to go to Jitra. It comes from a poor family, and they don't have savings.
Jitra and Kedah, in case
Yeah.
listeners are not aware.
To go across, and that probably will they need to cough up about 1,500 to 2,000 ringgit to make the move, over there, and the parents can't afford it.
Yeah.
So in the lower, the bottom 40, and especially if you go to the bottom 20%, where I think most families literally have very little in the way of savings. Things like this.
Yeah, fantastic.
Help. It goes a long way. It helps to pay for the bus fare or the airfare. Helps to get them ahead.
And our numbers indicate that contributions are rising strongly, which is indicative that wages are rising strongly.
Okay.
It is in pockets.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's not that broad-based. So I think the income tax collection is basically just coming from the fact that incomes are rising,
Right.
and will be rising. I think bonuses next year will be decent compared to this year.
Right.
And this year was still okay. I think the pressure is off in terms of both government and households.
Okay.
Global growth is, for once in probably the past decade, it's synchronized. Everybody's growing now. Trade is growing. So it's a much more benign environment than we've seen for the last 3 years. The ringgit is undervalued, but not as undervalued as most people think it is.
Okay.
My estimate is roughly around 5 to 7%.
Okay.
So from here, where we are now, I think it should be around 4 to the US dollar rather than 4.2 to 4.3. The other aspect of it is that most of this movement is actually coming from the US dollar, not the ringgit. Okay. Did one NDB have an effect? Yes, it did.
Okay.
But it was quite short-lived. I think about roughly around 9 months or so. Yeah. Roughly around the point of time of the WSJ article coming out and the sale of EDRA.
Okay.
And it did have an effect then, as far as what my studies are concerned. But since then, no. I think the biggest issue that foreign investors have with the ringgit right now is they're scared of Bank Negara. Literally.
Because of changes in regulatory policies.
Correct. So they're looking at it as regulatory risk more than anything else. So they're quite cautious about buying into ringgit assets because of that. There's a slight perception problem here in the sense that it's not really the ringgit that's affecting prices of these products.
Okay.
It's more a case of that the global prices of these products are rising.
Right.
And it's expensive for everybody, not just Malaysians.
Right.
And we can specify it. I mean, if you look it up in the CPI, the detailed CPI,
Right.
it's there.
Okay.
Milk is rising, eggs are rising, seafood is rising.
Yes.
I think the only exception is chicken.
Yeah,
Beef is rising.
Yeah.
Beef has gone up crazy.
I think cabbage rose, right?
Yeah. And part of that is simply because over the past 15 years, we've had China developing, we've had India developing, and all these people are coming out of poverty and they're changing their diets, and they're putting stress on food supplies, right? It's not imported inflation, it's the fact that the commodities themselves are rising.
the government is trying to push for this IBS, industrialized building systems incentives, so that you can decrease the overall reliance on foreign workers, as well as also decrease the construction costs. But that actually needs more capital investment on the part of the developers, and we'll have to wait and see to see whether the developers do respond.
I don't think it's something that the federal government can do on its own, frankly.
Okay.
You need to have state involvement,
Right.
and everybody needs to sit down and figure out the cost structures and everything. That's one reason why I think we need to really look at reforming state finance as well.
Okay.
Because of that reliance on property income, that has a contributory effect on housing costs.
All right.
Because of land costs.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to have everybody in that discussion. The federal government on its own can only do so much. So the budget alone is not, I would say, is not really the proper vehicle for addressing this.